But in the case of Bitcoin, it's designed to be attacked, and it's designed to be disruptive, to really drive home the point that Bitcoin is designed to disrupt the financial system, the fiat money system. And the way it's designed, Tucker, is that the more you try to attack it, the stronger it gets. Because the way to attack it is to throw computational power at it, which enhances those to continue to mine it, which means that the hash rate, which is the underlying algorithm that gives it its power, gets stronger, which means it gets more secure, and therefore the price goes higher. Another chapter in the history of Bitcoin where the traditional finance is imploding. The central banks are nervous. The central banks are having hearings. Christine Lagarde is quite upset because she says that Bitcoin is an escape hatch. And of course, she's right, because you're escaping the central bank system, the fiat money system, with money that allows people to have unconfiscatable property that's completely outside of the current system. And that scares people. If you have a population owning unconfiscatable property that cannot be assailed by any authority, it's completely decentralized. And that's why it's causing the shockwaves around the world. Bitcoin solves this because Bitcoin is not controlled by anyone. It is pure market driven. And the price of Bitcoin, the value of Bitcoin is dictated purely by people's willingness to have or need to have an unconfiscatable, uncensorable way to own property outside of what they see as a very big corrupt system. You know, what I would add to it is that Bitcoin beats the kleptocracy. Bitcoin beats the inherent fraud and the problems in the U.S. economy as it has now descended into what would almost be argued a permanent state of dysfunction by a captured regulators, venal, ineffective politicians, and a media, present company excluded, but a media that's also in their pocket as well. So we have really a crisis. This is why El Salvador has become the beacon. El Salvador is now the shining city on the hill. El Salvador is now where hope lives in the world because you have a president who recognized the potential of Bitcoin early, who recognized that everything else was garbage. And now they formally created a Bitcoin office. They formally created new securities laws, which will open the way for volcano bonds. So they're going to escape the IMF by producing their own volcano bond financing mechanism, which I'm consulting on.
What's a volcano bond?
So you're tapping into geothermal energy to reward investors with a Bitcoin dividend via a bond offering, essentially is what it is. So it's a volcano-backed bond. And the proceeds are used to enhance their geothermal energy capacity because they have a lot of stranded energy. We already know it works because in Iceland, they developed a huge Bitcoin mining industry tapping into the Icelandic geothermal energy, of which they have a lot. Here in El Salvador, they're turning geothermal into Bitcoin, the hardest money known to man in history, that gives financial freedom to all Salvadorans and anyone around the world, and unconfiscatable, immutable, uncensorable money. And President Bukele recognized that early. He's been tweeting about it since 2017, and he's got a full Bitcoin plate, a full agenda, which is in motion right now. So this is really happening. So El Salvador is really becoming a beacon of hope. Well, let's dig into the numbers for a second. So since making Bitcoin legal tender, GDP is up 10%. That's 2.8 billion. So 560 million or so goes into the treasury. The paper loss of the Bitcoin is maybe 60 or 70 million. He's up $500 million on his Bitcoin if you do the full accounting. Let's take a look at this, Tucker. GDP up 10.3% in El Salvador. Tourism up 52%. That's directly related to Bitcoin. Employment up 7%. Exports up 17%. Internal revenue is up 37%. Not by raising taxes, but by shaming people to pay their taxes. The finance director goes on TV every Thursday and says, hey, you there, the grocery store chain, you didn't pay your taxes. And they're like, oh, you got me. But let's look at violent crime, down 95% in El Salvador. 95%. They've gone from the murder capital of the world to the safest country in Latin America. I live there. I live in San Salvador with my wife, Stacy, and the absolute, it's like people after victory in Europe Day, you know those scenes of people kissing in the street and being happy? That's the way Salvadorans are. They're like, we're free, we're on the street, we're at a party, we're surfing, we're at the museum. They're like literally having a street party 24/7 because they got rid of all the gangs. I went to my local pupusa seller and she said, oh, I said, I didn't order extra cheese. She said, no, this is the way it is now because I have extra money and I just hired somebody to work with me. So now multiply that times 7 million people. And you end up with a GDP up 10.3% in the last year. And it's probably going to be double digits again this year. By simply empowering people to work hard, keep their money, get rid of the gangs, and with Bitcoin added to the mix. This is another thing. If you have Bitcoin, you're giving people the ability to opt out of the system. Have the wealth that's unconfiscatable. It's their own wealth. Nobody can touch it. Humanity has fought against tyranny our entire existence on this planet as humanity. And there have been achievements for us to escape tyranny. In the United States, with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, was a high watermark in having a tyranny-free life. But that has been undermined by essentially the central banks. Well, what happened was that in a community called El Zonte, which is their beach community on the coast, a very magnanimous, benevolent Bitcoiner gifted $100,000 worth of Bitcoin to that community to create a circular economy of people just using Bitcoin because there's a lot of surfers and they couldn't have access to cash because the nearest ATM was 5 miles away. And they needed some currency that would work for everybody. And so Bitcoin is that universal currency. So they said, let's make a community that's going to run on Bitcoin, a Bitcoin standard here in El Zonte, the surfing community. Okay. So then what happened is that Jack Mallers, who runs a company called Strike in Chicago, noticed that his app, which is a Bitcoin app called Strike, was getting 20,000 downloads a day. And it was like, the growth was off the chart. And he's like, what is going on? So he goes and he visits with President Bukele. And he explains really the whole story in terms of not only, kind of enhancing what the president already kind of knew about Bitcoin. Even when he was mayor in San Salvador, he was tweeting about it. So he was aware of it. And from there, he said, you know what, let's roll this out across the country, make Bitcoin legal tender in El Salvador. Oh, it gets back to what I said at the very beginning, Tucker, and that is Bitcoin is designed to be attacked. The more you attack it, the stronger it gets because the hashing algorithm that's at the core of the technology is increased by all of these folks trying to get into the system and attack the system, which makes it more secure, which makes the price go up. So we want it. We want people to attack Bitcoin. It attracts people attacking it.
But what if the U.S. government attacks Bitcoin by regulating the exchanges or by making it illegal to use it as currency?
It's the U.S. government's game to lose. The U.S. government has a choice. Either they can make Bitcoin legal tender and start stacking Bitcoin like the president of El Salvador, who's had an enormous Bitcoin-related gift, and his economy is now the shining city on the hill, or they can try to regulate Bitcoin and attack Bitcoin and be left out of the 21st century financial revolution that is Bitcoin. Her remedy of somehow regulating Bitcoin is fallacious and a non-starter because Bitcoin is already self-regulated. Bitcoin is the most regulated technology that's ever existed. It's called the consensus protocol that runs the centerpiece of the technology itself. The only thing about it is that it exists completely outside of anyone's control. Like any technology, with each iteration, it gets simpler and simpler. So I work with a company called Swan Bitcoin, for example, and they have an app, and it's very, very easy. When I started it back in 2011, it was very difficult to kind of manage Bitcoin. When it was $1 and it was on, it was very difficult to manage. But now we're at a point in 2022 where the user interface of Bitcoin is now very easy. It's not natural for people to think that they would want to have this Bitcoin completely under their self-custody because there's a lot of responsibility with that. People are grown up with the idea that banks are safe and institutions are safe and I don't need to worry about it. But we're at a point in history where you do need to worry about it and banks are not safe. Whereas Bitcoin, you cannot seize Bitcoin. It's unseizable. And if I have a 12-word seed phrase that I've memorized, I can literally go through the airport naked and go anywhere in the world and have access to any amount, billions of dollars in Bitcoin. And nobody can stop me from that. And then you're like, you know what? I'm here. I'm in the so-called third world country. But the people I meet are hardworking, entrepreneurial, friendly people. The president has everyone's interest at heart. Everyone's on the same team, and it's very easy to live there. I wish everyone would get on a Bitcoin standard, deliver possession of their own assets. It's a rug pull on the system. Bitcoin is the ultimate form of defiance. It's the Boston Tea Party of our century. It's the Gettysburg, it's the ultimate American act. There's nothing more American than Bitcoin because it snubs your nose at authority. This is quintessential American is to essentially say we're ungovernable. We're not part of your empire. We're not part of your top-down system. We are individually governed ourselves, and we have values. But if you're going to take those away, then we'll leave, and we'll start a new America. We'll start America somewhere else. It's an idea. It doesn't have to be in frickin' Chicago. It can be in San Salvador. I'm still American, but I'm in San Salvador because I've got my Bitcoin, which is the most American thing ever invented. It's an American invention, and it's changing the world, and it's changing our species in that we're evolving toward a more benevolent. Here's something that I've told the president face to face. It monetizes peace and love, and it demonetizes hate and war. Because if I have wealth that's unconfiscatable, no amount of coercion or violence is going to work. You can't get my Bitcoin. So you've got to come with me with something else in a peaceful way. If everyone is on a peace standard, which is Bitcoin, there's no violence. I just heard today, by the way, that the president, Bukele, he retired some of the nation's debt, outstanding external debt. He just announced today he's getting rid of it all. They're going to get rid of all their external debt.
Seriously?
Yeah. So on average, it's 300% at the planet Earth debt to GDP. El Salvador is going the complete opposite direction because they don't want to have any ties to these banks and the IMF and the others, and they've got the cash to do it. They're thriving. They're making money. And if you have a government that is doing their job and by just recycling, creating opportunities. It's equal opportunities there, not equal outcomes. The president, Bukele, has said that. It's a speech that could have been lifted from an American leader decades ago. When I'm in El Salvador, I feel a sense of opportunity, and we're at the beginning of an incredible new era.